Go ahead.
Okay, so here we are, we're at Ocean Point, and we're going to be looking now at Mytilus edulis, the blue mussel. And that is a zone former that used to be really dominant in this ecosystem. And since I was a student at Bowdoin, their numbers have dwindled. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of the blue mussel population in the Gulf of Maine has disappeared. And so we're just going to show you where they are, and so where you would look for them if you were in the intertidal and you were looking for Mytilus edulis, the blue mussel. So higher in the intertidal we have Calithrix, the blue-green algae. Below Calithrix there's often a bare rock zone where the Littorina saxatilis have eaten the blue-green algae. The next zone down are barnacles, and historically the zone that was below the barnacle was the blue mussel, or Mytilus edulis. And these creatures are amazing. They adhere to rocks or boats or docks, anything that is what am I trying to say? A hard surface. They adhere with these things called byssal threads. And they form an entire ecosystem within their byssal thread system. So if you were to take these into the lab and look through a microscope, you would see just the diversity of organisms that lives in the byssal threads of these organisms is amazing. These are a filter feeder, which means that they have an in-current and an ex-current siphon. We'll teach you about that later in the semester. And they filter plankton, here are our plankton friends again, out of the water, and that's how they make their living. They also, in their life history, they produce gametes that go into the water column, and they have a planktonic form. So they spend a fair bit of time actually in the plankton as zooplankton. So they're a meroplankton. Do you remember that from our plankton lecture? So once they settle, they are these amazingly adorable little tiny mussels, and they move around with their foot until they find a location in the intertidal that's suitable for them, where they find other organisms of the same species, and they know they can find food. Because if they land too high in the intertidal, they won't be submerged enough to be getting enough food. So they want to land somewhere just in the sweet spot between, historically, like I said, between the barnacle and the rockweed. So this is where they like to live. And since I was a student at Bowdoin about 30 years ago, about 60 to 80% of these have disappeared from the Gulf of Maine, as I said.
Can you show us what their historical range would have looked like on this rock?
Yes, and so historically they would have been barnacle, and then this would have all been mussel. We would have had a blue zone of mussel that starts to overlap a little bit with the rockweeds. The mussels are actually a very good competitor for space, and they are the reason that the barnacles have been pushed higher in the intertidal, because remember, competition and predation are two important factors that set the lower limit of the distribution of an organism. These can also live subtidally, of course, because then they're always submerged and can always be feeding. And the upper limit of their zone is set by their physiological limit. So they can't live any higher than this, because they will be too hot, too cold, not enough food, whatever the upper limit of their physiological limits are. That's the highest they can live.
Can you tell us what's happened to them? Why have we lost so many mussels?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It seems to be human caused. It seems that the pH is causing trouble with calcification of shells, and the temperature is causing high mortality in the plankton. So if they're in the water and the water has warmed too much, the planktonic form of these organisms is not able to withstand the heat. So it seems to be those two major causes, and of course pollutants. And it's not really predation as much as those human